A little dark, perhaps, but that's how we're feeling, isn't it?
I don't know. I kind of like that.
Did you?
I won't forget the good times. Yeah, that was nice.
Good.
Cool. I feel great.
Good.
Thank you.
There is a glimmer of hope within that the message of that unreleased Band of Heathens song. So holler back. I broke you off a little something from my employment.
A special request just for this special pod.
That's right.
It's the end of the summer split, the end of the season. We have 5, count them, 5 short months until the start of spring split.
Just 5. That's all we have to wait because we have played ourselves into a great position here, content-wise.
5 months. I mean, we're not the most prolific people out there, Cole. Let it not be mistaken.
Give us some credit, man. We're
not esports talk hitting 4 videos a day.
No one can be Jake.
But 5 months is a long time to try to fill the radio silence.
Well, fill the radio silence, we will.
Let's do it.
But yeah, it does feel a little weird to just be faced with that huge block of time. Like when we lost that series, it's like, is this really this is really 2020. 2020 is now over, right?
Yeah, guess that's it. This is Hunter Talk, by the way.
Oh yeah, sorry, did we not say that? Hunter Talk.
I don't think so. Hunter Talk.
I'm your dad, Cole. And the one time I don't do it, Jordan doesn't do it. That's your dad, Jordan.
I just like to keep you on your toes.
This is a can of Rip It. Tribute Cherry Lime. Rip It powers our podcast and is allowing me to drink away my sorrows in the energy drink way of saying that.
That's right. And you know what that means? We're going to be super hyped, Cole.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wish I had that on the soundboard. That girl.
Yeah. Well, someday.
Okay. So a lot to talk about tonight. Obviously, getting bounced quite emphatically out of the playoffs, losing to EG, and getting memed and flamed in the process. And actually, that is, I think, where we're going to start the podcast with a quick conversation about toxicity and memeing, because the rest of this podcast, we make no mistake, we are going to be, critical of a team, a staff, players that we support and like. And so we're going to first show you the distinctions between how to do that and how not to do that. And then we will be exemplars of said technique. But look, here's the thing that I think everybody dumped on 100T, including 100T fans. A lot of 100T fans flaming people in chat, flaming Ryoma, flaming Poome, even flaming contracts I saw.
Anybody get someday?
Cody,
did you get that one on your bingo card?
I didn't get someday because it's pretty hard to do that. But
Cowards.
It was crazy how much toxicity came out in the wake of that. Now, it's not like we didn't expect to have negative comments for losing a series, and especially losing a series in the way we did. But things started to spiral out of control, and there was a lot of conversation happening on Twitter, so we figured we would mention some of it and kind of talk through a little bit of it before we start. The big one being the MarkZ tweet, right? So after the series finished, MarkZ tweeted "Poo Gang" and tweeted Poome's KDAs from all 3 games. So 0-5-0, 3-10-2, 0-8-4. This was embraced by a large segment of the community as a fun jump off point to start spewing a lot of ridiculousness out into the interwebs. And I think it's just worth a little bit of conversation because it seemed weird at the beginning. MarkZ being someone who has advocated we need to have a good environment in NA for rookies and for developing talent, for people to come up through academy. They need to feel like they can develop here. We need to grow our own people. This seemingly being anti that philosophy, right? To flame someone for losing.
Right. I mean, can I just put this is really the summary of what I have to say about this in many ways.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of potty humor. I'm just going to go out there and say it. It's a poop joke. Right?
Yeah.
Merits of the joke aside, or regardless of whether you think people overreacted or got too bent out of shape about the fact that he was criticizing rookie talent. It's like, it's potty humor, dude. Like you are a professional and you have a platform and you're cracking poop jokes. So I just personally, like, ain't my thing. I'm not getting excited about a joke about poop.
I agree. That's not my brand of humor, as you guys will surely know. I don't think it was that heavy on that. I think he was just playing off of Poome Gang and that's where it landed.
I mean, I know he was, but still.
The thing is, like, after like a lot of people use this as a jumping off point, like this was the alley-oop for the dunk, right? He actually came back and responded to some of the criticism that was put his way, and I thought this was very good from him. So I wanted to read that. He said, "Just came back and see this blowing up. Not going to delete. It was a poor attempt at a joke. Nice. Take responsibility for it. On the analyst desk, I've talked at length about lack of experience and learning to play from behind in competitive play being a struggle for new players. Stepping in mid-split is always hard as well. I always caveated criticism of Poome with his incredible rise in such a short period of time, and I'm excited to see more from him. I hoped that would carry more weight in public discourse than one poor joke tweet, and apologize for any hate this caused on his timeline. He doesn't deserve it. Last thing for clarification, I said I'm not deleting because I don't want people have to hunt down the context, which is always annoying. That is not me saying I'm not sorry. I am sorry, as I said above, which I thought was a good response from him.
Better considered than the initial tweet. Here's a better joke tweet. Boom gang.
You know what, Jordan? Hindsight is 2020. If we all would have thought of that better, more appropriate joke, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I want to see if I can find it here. What I said about Mark, because I commented on it and I said, look, if we're being 100% honest here, the problem isn't Mark's tweet. Like literally it isn't the tweet. It's the legion of immature followers who see this and use it as their cue to jump in and try to toxically dunk all over players and staff. It's a problem with the scene. And I appreciate Mark's apology and clarification because it shows he recognizes that because of his position, that can happen. So I did want to put that out there. I think we've got a scene problem, right? And this was evident to me too, watching Team Liquid's Twitter, like through the end of the regular season and through playoffs. Like they've just been farming views and likes from making fun of teams that they aren't even playing. And really most of the time the memes aren't even very good. Occasionally they are. Most of the time they're pretty like, okay, that's the best you could do.
Yeah.
And it just seems weird, like, because they've gotten a lot of attention and a lot of impressions and a lot of likes and a lot of people saying, OMG, I love your timeline now. This is what I subscribe for. It's like, it's so weird to me. Like and let me say, I do not mind banter between teams who are playing. Okay. If they want to like tweet a couple things like of banter against us when we're playing them that week, cool. Yep. Totally fun. But when you're just sitting there,
engage with them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if you're just
been fun.
Right. If you're just sitting on the sidelines, like tossing these things out to make weird league fans happy, that just seems weird to me. Like just focus on your own games. You know what I mean? And don't just try and like take sideline pot shots at people. It just rubbed me the wrong way. But I think it's indicative of what people like. Like, you know, I was on record before talking about G2 and how it's like, good for them that they found their voice. Too bad the voice is like super toxic, right?
Right.
And I will say that since in the last like 12 months, I feel like it's shifted a lot more towards self-deprecation than making fun of other teams all the time, even though they do it occasionally. But yeah, it's like everybody kind of wanted to follow suit behind G2 and be the cool kids and make fun of other people. It's just like, oh gosh, it's so tired. It feels immature to me and I'm ready for it to be over. But beyond that, I feel like it's not creating the healthiest environment for players and coaches and orgs and teams. I mean, you literally can almost feel the tension for these players, like when they are playing.
Yeah. You know, it's an interesting perspective. I'm glad you brought that up. That I think a lot of the times people talk about the league community, the fan base, certainly the Twitter presence and how toxic it is. And there's a lot of time spent talking about that. And there's not as much time spent thinking about why that is. And, you know, when Mark tweeted that, and like, you know, I don't think Mark's a bad guy, and
yeah, no, I don't.
Everybody tweets stuff that they wish they wouldn't have tweeted. Like in this, he can file this away in that.
And he owned it totally. So.
Yeah, he owned it, right? He filed it away immediately and said, "Well, that was a mistake." But I just don't think you see that as much, right? Like imagine another person from an analyst desk of a big sport, and there might be some sports where you'd see this, but I think you're just a lot less likely to see that kind of thing. In part because I think in some ways it compromises the public perception of you as kind of a neutral observer, right? Like to make a joke about somebody, and I'm not even just talking about Poome here, about any player, right? To like meme them, I think it turns you into a fan, right? Rather than somebody who is to be looked up to as having a professional opinion, right? Anybody can tweet out a joke like that. And I think that's part of the reason you don't typically see stuff like that. And I did see some people saying like, kind of hitting on that note in replies to him, like you've used your platform for this, right? Like that's disappointing. And I think that's right. And I think he recognizes that. And my hope is, I think you're right. If this scene has a chance at changing, it has to come from the examples that people are setting, right?
Right.
And I think we're a ways away from that, especially when you see other people embracing it, right? It's like this clickbait thing. Everybody resist the urge. Don't do it. You don't need to generate content in that way. That's a race to the bottom, right? And impressions and clicks is not the goal here. If you're talking about the longevity and the health of an ecosystem and a fan base, and really the way people are thinking about your product, and as franchise holders, each of these teams has an obligation and a duty to the other teams and the fans to create something that has lasting potential. And I think that slowly you erode at that when you create a toxic culture where some people who might have otherwise played probably don't, right?
Yeah.
And that's not good.
And I think a lot of it is just not understanding the nuance and not being mature enough and measured enough to not take it too far. You know what I mean? Because again, I don't think Mark's tweet, I didn't like Mark's tweet, but I don't think it was too far. But the problem was it encouraged everybody else to take it even farther. You know what I mean? And
right.
That's what happens with these things is that like people, I think our chat right now is bringing up regular sports, traditional sports having, similar things that happen on with fans and even analysts, right? That say, but there's like, I don't know, there's a line that most people toe where you won't go too far with it. And you also won't incite that against other people. There are some exceptions for sure. And there are like running gags between stuff, but there's not like the same level of vitriol, and that's weird. And the sports, like traditional sports, are going to have the same problems where athletes are like going to get those DMs that say like, unspeakable things to them all the time because they dropped a catch or something like that. Like that's going to happen, and that's unfortunate. So I do think there is an element of like, even though it's not right, some of this does go along with the job and you have to have a thick skin and you can choose to not read all that stuff. I think there's some truth to that, but that doesn't mean we should like just be okay with
embrace it,
with it being out there, and we shouldn't encourage it either. So it's just like a weird, funky like place. And the reason again that we're saying this is because we are about to go on a journey where we're going to criticize players and team staff. Like, as this season wraps up, we clearly did not finish anywhere near where we wanted to be. And the team clearly has problems, and some of those problems have names associated with them, right? So we're about to criticize people, but there's a difference between criticizing and flaming and being vitriolic and toxic, okay?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Like our whole show angle has always been, we're going to be reasonable, right? We're going to be reasonable people with reasonable takes, try and just take things patiently and be measured. And that's what we're going to do as we criticize this team. But make no mistake, like criticism is going to happen and it needs to happen. It just needs to be healthy and balanced.
Right. I think that's spot on. And I think that's kind of the disappointing thing about it, right? It's like, I think sometimes when people advocate for, not speaking critically, like some people are mad at Mark because he dared to speak badly of Poome.
Sure. right.
Like Poome's a guy I like. Hey, I've got his back. Don't talk about him.
Yes.
which, that's probably even less productive than, just dismissing something as kind of a bad, conceived joke, poorly conceived joke. Because if you are not willing to criticize people, or if you can't see that people deserve criticism, you're not going to get any better, and this is something that's very important. I think we're going to talk about this. I'd like to. It makes it hard as a fan to understand what a reasonable approach is to addressing a problem, right? And surely there are problems in this team, right? You don't finish 7th and you don't crash out of playoffs if there are no problems. I don't think anybody's debating that. So that the next step then, as you think about this, is like, how do you get from the point where you acknowledge that your team, your favorite team, isn't playing as they should, and then move on to the next logical step there, which is, and what should they do about that, right? And that's really where the meat of this conversation is. And you kind of hope, and that's why I think a lot of people look to the analyst desks for that insight into, boy, Poome, it looked like Poome had a rough series. What was going on there?
Yeah.
And I think you get a lot more value out of comments from people if they are providing a sense of why you might have just seen what you saw. And unfortunately, a lot of the comments tend to focus instead on just rehashing and joking about stuff that everybody knows is there, right? 100 Thieves didn't do well. Got it. Yep. Why? And I don't see as many people talking about why. That's not to say no one is. I saw a lot of really insightful tweets that I'm sure, we could talk about too. And we'll get into some of that stuff as we go into the show. But you've got to be able to criticize without getting personal or toxic or flaming people or doing any of that stuff.
Yep. So let's attempt to do that as much as we possibly can here.
Right? Let's go for it.
Because clearly, like I said, things have not gone well for this team down the final stretch of this split. It's been a weird arc for the team. Started out poorly. We got this surge of a honeymoon period from having new players and new energy, new wins, and then it kind of just regressed backwards towards where we were before after that. And this series with EG, I mean, look, guys, we played EG very, very recently. We crushed them in the last game that we played of the regular season. It was not close. We beat them in like 24 minutes. So I was thinking we had a much better chance. I think most people thought we had a better chance. I saw us favored more than I saw us as underdogs, according to people that I follow on Twitter and all that. So very surprising to come out and get 3-0'd so thoroughly by EG. So big questions to ask along here. Do you want to start with draft, Jordan?
Yep.
Okay.
Let's go for it.
Let's go into the draft because these were not like some things we kind of predicted, right? Even before we played the series out, we said, if you ban Galio against us, you're basically making our mid laner completely ineffective, right?
Yeah.
And then we pointed to the early game of contracts. If you are able to take away some of his early game power picks, you have a very, very good chance of just eliminating us from competition altogether. And that is exactly what we saw. We saw Galio banned every time. We saw Olaf banned every time. That's just the way the ball bounced here, and we did not seem to have any backup plan. How did you feel watching those drafts?
Yeah, I mean, so here's what I wasn't disappointed by. And before this series, I had said, I just hope that we play our game, right? I hope we don't try to do something fancy and trip ourselves up and then look back and wonder, well, yeah, we really wish we could have played Ornn, but we still can't, turns out. We didn't do that, right? So I was glad to see that. And in some ways, I was glad to see it because it made the outcome that much more decisive, right? We played our best looking lineup and we went as hard as we could after the things that we thought would help us win. There's nothing cute. There's nothing funny, nothing sneaky, right? We were just trying, we were just giving our best shot. So I was glad for that. And here's the other thing. It confirmed to us we are an easily prepared for team at this point.
Thing, yeah.
It is very easy. And they banned Olaf Galio every game. And then they had kind of a free pick to, wild card, do whatever you want with it, right? And it hurt us, man. It hurt us really badly. And we just never got to looking like we have looked at our best. And so, in large part, when I think about draft, I think about, okay, well, what do you do differently, right? What could you have done?
Right.
Instead of just saying it was a bad or stupid draft. I don't think they really galaxy brained us, right? They just banned the 2 champions who we really needed to have. And there's not a whole lot you can do about that as the coach. I think that's where I come down on that piece of the assessment. No matter how Zix plays that, they know who they're banning the first 3. And that changes the contour of the rest of your draft for the entire series. So, we tried to find ways to recreate the things that have made us strong. We saw a TF come out. We talked about that, and we wondered about that because we'd never done that.
We had seen it banned.
Right, we'd seen it banned.
At least a handful of games through the split. So it seemed like maybe there was something there. Maybe something had happened in scrims. And because it was a mobile champion again, maybe that portion of the Galio model could work out for us in some way. And they just let us have it. They said, okay, cool.
Yeah. And guess what? It paid off for them, right? And then they didn't need to ban it, and we didn't want to pick it. So they played it as they should have. So when you're talking about draft, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
We gave it our best at draft, and they had an answer.
I'm like, part of me wonders if we did really give it our best at draft though, because some of the things like we can't control what their first 3 bans are, right? Like that just happens. They just ban, what they're going to ban. In this case, literally Olaf, Galio every time. Olaf, Galio were the first 2 bans every time. And then, and they so clearly targeted our weaknesses, right? So again, or I'm sorry, they neutralized what we want to do. That's more what I mean. So Galio for Ryoma removed. Contractual early game champion like Olaf removed. Then they took Graves every time.
Yep.
Which we didn't do anything to stop. We just let them have Graves. And then they spent their other bans kind of targeting some of like the weaknesses that they could key in on, right? Like preventing Poome from playing champs that he would be comfortable on. So not letting him get a favorable matchup and not letting Cody get a favorable matchup either.
Cody got Caitlyn, right? And that was his best looking game.
Yep. And they banned it in the other 2 games. So, you know what I mean? Like they banned it before he played it and they let him play it once. He's like, oh, okay, he's pretty good. Let's ban that again and put one less ban in on Poome because Poome's not playing well. And it was so easy for them. And to get the Graves every time, like why, like we didn't have a plan to stop that at all.
Do you think that the outcome is material different if we ban the Graves or take the Graves away in some way?
Well, Svenskeren certainly was one of the biggest pop-off points of the whole squad. I think maybe part of it comes from the fact that he played Svenskeren he played Graves in their game before this at the end of the season. He played Graves, we stomped him. So maybe it was like, no worries. Clearly it was a big pick in game 1. I can maybe understand leaving it to be played in game 2. But leaving it game 3 after he pops off twice in a row, like, is that really the move? So I don't know. It felt very unimaginative. The other thing that I don't think you and I have mentioned is taking Renekton, who I think like has a really, really like surprisingly low win rate to the point where you question why it's being picked. We all know Someday is a beast, right? But I think if I saw right, I think he's only like won a single game on Renekton this year. That is not what you want to see. You know what I mean? Yeah, looking at this, we beat Immortals with Renekton and he lost every other game. So, and I will say in game 2, he almost single-handedly won us the game. So I'm not going to criticize him too much on that, but like the pick was just weird. It seemed like most people are pretty settled on that pick isn't really going to get a team over the finish line.
Yeah, as I was watching it, I was kind of thinking, there were themes I wanted to see, right? We talked about the things that we should try for, right? Olaf is gone, grab Nidalee. We saw him do that. So we didn't see Someday on a tank. We didn't see him on, kind of a supportive top laner. And, I always have a harder time like, why would you pick a worse carry than a better carry, right? I see those as different shades of the same strategy. So I tend to give some kind of credit to the thought process that goes into which, like, we didn't play a different style. It's not like we went in there and said, we're not going to put him on a carry just because we love him on Camille, or not Camille, sorry. We love him on Ornn, right?
Yeah.
Or we love him on Scion. Let's get him some Scion time. He's kind of in the meta right now. So I don't know, why they went with Renekton of the carries available. I just, who knows?
Yeah. And I don't know if you specifically said Camille during that, but it's like Camille has been a strong pick for someday.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be a champion that could have really succeeded. And I'm bringing that up too to avoid saying Renekton's name again, because Chad is flaming me for saying Renekton instead of Renekton or whatever it's supposed to be.
Me too, then.
Look, at least I'm not saying Aatrox or Atrox. All right. I'm gonna go with Renekton. So, but yeah, like, and then look, the other thing is that in the last game when it was desperation time, we tried something way different, right? We saw completely different team comp come out. Contracts on Lee Sin isn't a rare thing. We know that. Ryoma on LeBlanc isn't necessarily a rare thing. It hasn't usually been a good thing either, but he has had one or two good games on the champ.
Yep.
But we bring out Malphite for Someday, which, look, man, when we try stuff on Someday, I'm not mad. Like, he's Someday. But also Pantheon for Poome. And it was weird. Like, usually I would feel like we would take a weird swing on one champion, but still try to keep everything, in line, like a little more regular. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the combo ideas were between Malphite and Pantheon, but we didn't get to use them, so it didn't really matter. But yeah, it's just like at the end, it really felt like, screw it, you guys play whatever you want to play. And part of me is like, I don't blame them, but at the same time, it's like, you have to rein that into a point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, at that point, I think, because here's what's apparent after games 1 and 2. Our fast, aggressive comp is not good enough to beat them. So do you run it back, right? Do you do a minor variation on that, and then kind of feel like, well, we should have taken notes after the first 2 games because it didn't work. I just didn't see. It's kind of like you have to swing for the fences, right? You have to try something different. I guess I'm just glad that we didn't try for the standard play at that point. And clearly, Poome on Pantheon didn't work. Now, for Poome, we've seen him play a lot of different champions, and he's had pretty good success on a lot of them too. So when it came up, I wasn't immediately like, oh, well, we've given up and this is over now.
Yeah.
But I think what we're seeing is there are limits, right? This guy is human, and not only that, but it just, at that point, we felt very defeated. We felt like a very defeated team to me.
Yeah. So part of that is, like you said, just weird drafting, very easy to prepare for drafting. And you're bringing up the fact that, our early game isn't strong enough, in this case, to overtake what they're trying to do, which is a problem, right? Because that has been the one thing that's worked for us, right? We've talked about how we've kind of felt increasingly one-dimensional, where the early game is the absolute game maker or game breaker for us, right?
Yep.
If we get the early snowball, then we tend to stomp. If we don't, fast forward to 20 minutes and Contracts is down like 50 CS and people are dying on all sides of the map, right?
Yep.
So the problem with that is finding a direction forward, and I'm not opening this conversation now like, what do we do, for next year?
Yeah.
I'm not opening that conversation now, but when we have this one dimension that we're keyed in on that isn't even winning us a match against EG, like,
not one.
What do you build on?
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do you complement this without making a drastic change? It feels like there is no other way forward than more drastic roster change, which,
right,
we've seen a lot of roster changes. We haven't had a whole lot in way of stability over the years. So it's kind of at this point starting to feel like a self-perpetuating cycle, and that is a rough place to be.
Yeah, I mean that's always the concern, right? When you end a split in this fashion, in one way, there's a lot of clarity. Like we clearly cannot run this same squad back in 2021. It just wouldn't feel good. You know, we ended on a note where I feel like everybody is agreeing here that something has to change.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about is, so I guess then you go on to, well, which pieces might work, right? And I think like there are some pieces that everybody just agrees. Like Someday is still a great person to have on the team, regardless.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't know. You know, beyond that, I think there are question marks all around. You know, contracts maybe being that other piece where I think you could say if you could build an aggressive team around him, would he? Like, I don't feel like we've seen him do a lot that says he's not the person to play this position if this is the team you're trying to build.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think for Ryoma, there's a lot of evidence there that this is either not a play style or a system or a meta or a region that works for him, whatever it is, or maybe it's some combination of all of those. But clearly he's just not finding success. So you kind of go person by person and do that.
I want to work in a fan take or listener take along those lines. Nick Marr on Twitter said, the Ryoma experiment failed because we tried to craft him into an NA mid. In OPL, he played primarily push and roam champs, Akali, Yasuo, Ryze, etc. Throughout 2020, we tried to get him to play control champs like Bjergsen or Jensen, Azir, Ori, Zoe, with Galio being the main exception. And while I wouldn't say I categorically agree with this, I think there is a point there where, and that we've alluded to, where in this meta on this team, he's not playing the things that maybe we expected from him from seeing the highlights from before he was picked up, right? And when he was still in OPL. So there's something to be said for that. But, you know, it'd be very hard to say that mid lane isn't our primary problem at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, there's a follow-up question to that, which is who is playing those champions, right? And I don't think that those champions are getting a lot of play in the meta. I think it's kind of a meta thing more than anything. Yeah. Like, and there's always that there will always be that lingering question in my head, at least, of, you know, is it possible to play out? Like, you think about, this is gonna be please don't reject this outright. You think about people like Doinby, right? Who, stay with me. They find ways to play what they want to play, right? They kind of they're and I don't know if you get to set the meta if you are as amazing and talented as he is. Like, is that something that only he can do? There's one player on the planet who gets to do that, and it's him. Or are there teams and systems and coaches who see stuff like that and lean into it and say, you know what, they're not expecting to see? Nautilus mid. You know, like, I just don't know. I don't know. And I'm certainly not suggesting that would have been the solution. But what I do think is that there are probably overall teams and approaches to the game and thoughts about how to play it that allow for that kind of thing more. Whether or not he's good, I mean, there's another question you have to ask first, which is, we saw him play that in the OPL. Is he good enough to play that in NA, right? Like, the competition is stiffer. Is he somebody who can even, or is he just going to have like the game that I always have when Yasuo plays on my team, right? Where you're like, could you please stop? You know, please, if you could just farm, that would be great for now. So I don't know, but that's something I'll always wonder about, right? Because in his highlight reel, we did see that stuff.
Yeah, and then we've seen other teams, like you said, lean into that. And I'm not looking to FPX to be a comp for our team, but you can look to the Clutch / Dignitas of past, where they really leaned into Demonte's playstyle and let him go wild. They're like, okay, man, if you want to be the Kiana player, like, let's try and find a way for you to be the Kiana player. And for a while it worked, you know. Right. And I'm not
got into Worlds.
And I'm on, it did. I am not suggesting Demonte's our guy. I'm not suggesting I think he's a great player or anything like that. But there is something to be said for And I think we mentioned this last week, the trade-off between what is good League of Legends in your textbook and then what is good League of Legends for the group of players you have. And if there's a mismatch there, what does that point to? It points to the coaching direction, probably, right? The plan is crafted, under their instruction. And if they are making that decision, we are going to play what is better League of Legends on paper, then, that's going to restrict some of the champ pool that can be played by your players for better or for worse, right? And you got to own all pieces of that discussion. That's a tough one because the players you have can hamstring you, right? And they limit your draft choices on what is even viable for them to play. So which thing is going to win out? Do you try and minimize their weaknesses on something that should be good based on this patch, or do you try and risk it on letting them take whatever they're most comfortable with, even if it's not the best meta move, right? So that is why you and I are not paid to be coaches or GMs or whatever, because we would suck at making a tough decision like that, right?
Well, yeah, I mean that's the hard decision to make. And here's the other thing. As somebody who doesn't sit in the Rocket Mortgage training room, we will never know, right? We'll never know what the actual answer to that was. So it's fun to speculate. It's fun to have these ideas and talk about it. And in part, I think it's important as a fan base because, to some degree, right? The team is always reading the room, and they're, you don't need to look any further than Nadeshot's Twitch stream to know that he's checking Reddit, right?
Yeah.
He likes to look at Reddit and he keeps an eye on what he sees there. Maybe it's only when a post blows up, but he at least goes, right? And so if everybody, if the fans are saying, man, what happened to Ryoma's, aggressive assassin play, like these pop-off champs, when are we going to see that? If there's enough people saying it, maybe they feel a little bit more emboldened to try it. I don't know. But I think the important thing is you can't assume that was on the menu of options and they just decided not to go for it because they didn't like the idea of it. So we shouldn't assume that. It might have been because he's not very good at those champions.
Yeah.
And then how would you look if you ran that out in playoffs?
Right. And then you might be throwing a player to the wolves, right? Which you also don't want to do. Remember, these are people who care about people. This is not just like, we're going to make the best analytical League of Legends decision at all costs. Those costs are balanced, and you keep the long-term health of the player on your team in mind when you make those decisions. So it's rough, man. It is rough.
Yeah.
Do you want to backtrack and talk a little more about the EG series specifically, or do you want to just continue talking in general about some stuff?
I mean, there are points we could hit on, right? There are things that were important and that hurt. I just don't know how much it's worth talking about.
Well, let's make mention of a couple of the things that we saw, because I think if we're having this discussion about players and coaching and all that stuff, it's like, well, we gotta make observations based on what we saw, and what we saw is like, this is a team that that's going into the last series of a split, so even though contracts in Poome are new to the roster, fairly new. What has it been, like 4 weeks, 5 weeks, something along those lines? I think 5. Yeah. They are having some troubles in the macro game, right? Like things like getting Baron Elder and Ocean Soul. Did we have Ocean Soul also in that game? That same. So we had Ocean Soul, Baron, and Elder, and we weren't able to close out the game. Is that was the same game?
Yeah.
Wow. I knew we had Baron and Elder, and we weren't able to like keep pushing through the base and to take him down. That seems unusual. Usually Ocean itself is fairly a win condition. If you layer Baron and Elder top of each other, that's close to a win condition as well.
The stats would tell you it's like 85%. Like they ran through on the dive recently. The vast majority of teams with the soul of any kind win, and I'm sure it's higher for Ocean, which is largely regarded as the most powerful. Of the souls. And
we saw Ryoma overstep in base, right? In that game, and really risking Just that overstep really risked the entire game in and of that play. What we saw in the retreat is Someday came up to try and. I mean,
desperate.
I'm making this conclusion based on what I saw, but it looked like Someday went in to try and sacrifice himself so more people could live and defend the inevitable push into the base that was to follow, because it's better to have, 3 of your guys up than just Someday, right? So it seemed like he dove in there to kind of free them up. But that in and of itself was a risky play too, because it's like you're eliminating the only close to a carry player that you have really online. In that, I guess Cody was doing okay, but maybe that was the time Cody was actually dead. Gosh, I wish I had taken a better note on this before I had this conversation. But there's some other things too, right? We saw 3v1 push into Inhib after they were taking Baron, right? They essentially gave it to us, and we were too scared to fight 1v3 in their base, 3v1, I should say, in their base, and take that Inhib. So that whole push was just time wasted, right?
Right. They're trying to give Inhib, and we wouldn't take it.
Right. And we might have even given up a kill on the way out. I'm not even sure. We saw a couple of weird, probably bad TPs coming out. It just seems like there's so much like disconnect on how we're playing the map and what we're doing. So it seems to me like when we don't have the early game lead and the snowball is in effect, we're not sure how to handle it.
Yeah.
And geez, that's a big problem, man. Like I said,
huge problem.
Like, what do you, if you're having that kind of problem, it's like, it's more than just hands, right?
It's way more.
What do you do?
Yeah, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, I brought this point up that this current meta feels almost impossible for a team with a strong lead and a strong set of neutral objectives to lose some of these games. And there have been 2 situations now where we have really badly fumbled what should have otherwise been a completely just an advantage that almost never ends up with you losing the game. I don't know how else to say it. Like, so that is so concerning. And when you stack them all 3, like, has that ever happened in this meta, in this season, that somebody with all 3 of those?
That's a very interesting question. Yeah,
probably not, is my guess. That's, and I think at that point it's like, gold diff is kind of the last thing you're thinking about, because how much are the Baron stats worth? How much is the Elder execute worth? If you chop off however many % of HP of every person on their team, like, how much gold is that worth? And you got the Ocean Soul on top of it to just make sure that you don't ever have to leave. It's crazy. And this is not the first time that we've been knocking on the Nexus door only to, forget to leave when they when they try to kill us, and then we just die, or forget to dodge, that kind of thing. So
stay and fight it out, or leave, pick.
Right. It just feels like indecision. It feels like we don't really have clear, I don't know, it kind of feels like we don't have clear leadership. Like, these things should not be happening, regardless of kind of who's on the team. Like, you have a team of 5 professionals. And I think that what we see from a lot of other teams, almost every other team, I'd say, is when they're in that position, they seal the deal. And we couldn't do it.
Yeah. It reminds me, I think it was a conversation that they had on the dive, maybe. No, I think it was Keen who took over Jat's little deal with Keen. Was it Freak? Or I'm sorry, was it Kobe? I think it was Kobe and Keen, maybe. Anyway, there was a discussion a while back where
it was, yeah,
where Keen was talking about High, I believe, and talking about how High had this reputation for being a crazy good shot caller, right? And this is before my League of Legends time, everybody. So I'm just repeating the point that was made here. But the reputation was that High was a great shot caller. And Keen was pointing out that it wasn't so much that he got the call right every time, because there were plenty of times when he would get the call wrong. But the point is, he made a decisive call, right, and did it quickly, and that's like, that kind of leadership seems to be missing from here, and that's a rough one. Yeah.
And so here's why it's important to have this conversation. I think it's fairly safe to say Someday's not bringing that to this team, right? And whatever the team looks like in spring of 2021, we should not bank on Someday being that for this team, right? We need to find a player who can be that. And that is one of the things that never shows up from a fan perspective, we don't listen to comms, right? We don't see how the team plays and works together. We never do. I mean, mostly I think it's secondhand stuff you're hearing, right? It's it's reputations people build for themselves that then get talked about, that kind of thing. We got to find that. And I think, you know, we see it a little bit in Valorant. You got to build around that, right? Like, it doesn't need to be the best player on your team, but you got to have that somewhere. And if you don't have it, then you get stuff like this, where it's like, how did you even find a way to lose this game? That's unbelievable.
Yeah. So we're in this position where clearly things need to be done. And I'll say for the chat right now, we're not going to deep dive that on this podcast. We will probably do that at a later date during this off season. But we are going to talk about, you know, just some things in general. But I think one of the main principles, one of the guiding principles here is we have to have this conversation that you and I have had over and over again, which is how much time is enough time for these players. You know, and I think like we need to be fairly consistent with that, because whatever rule you apply, like, you need to be applying it reasonably and between all the guys, right? Because look at what has happened, right? Poome rose up so quick. He barely had any time in amateur. Then he had like 2 weeks in academy or something like that, and got bumped up to LCS. So this dude, and as we know, he'd only been playing League of Legends for like 2.5 years before that, right? Whoa. So this dude has barely played the game. Okay. Right. So how much time do you give him? Then you turn around and say, well, look at Contracts. Contracts came into this squad halfway through the split as well. So he's had half a split. I saw a lot of people, a surprising amount of people, talking about how, like, oh, clearly, like, Contracts can't cut it or whatever. I'm not convinced that that's the case. I mean, he clearly was ineffective in some key games or whatever, but I'm not convinced that he's just not done. Ryoma, we do have a full, full league year of him, right? Yeah. 2 splits, plus some preseason. There's much more ground, in my opinion, to make a decision on an evaluation of him. But is that even really fair? Like, is how much time do you give these players before you make a decision? And there's just this trade-off between what we want as fans, which is to win, and what the team wants, which is to be good. And if you continually sacrifice the development to be good for trying to win in the moment, you can't expect those results. So if we were to say dump everybody but someday in the offseason or whatever, it's like, okay, you know, 2 of these players definitely didn't get enough of a chance in this squad. One may or may not have, you know? So it's not good policy just to say that. So it's a really hard trade-off, because clearly we want to win, right? Like, I want to win. I'm tired of the way that we've performed in the last 2 years. You know, even the end of 2018 was not what we expected, even though I think that's overblown. At least we're at Worlds, right? But for the last 2 years, it's been a struggle, man. And as I've pointed out continually, this is now 3 years that 100 Thieves has been in the LCS. So people's opinion of us, our brand, what we're known for, our thing, it's going to become concrete pretty soon, you know, if it hasn't already. And it may have already. What we see a lot of this is an apparel company, right? That also does esports. Like, that is what the identity is becoming, even though the motivations are not just that, right? Like, that's kind of what the line is about the team. It is, man. Like, what do you do about this? Like, what do we do about how much time is enough time? Yeah. I don't know. I think we want too much too quickly, but at the same time, we don't want to lose. So what gives and how?
Let me bring you back to some of the things you've said, because I think that's where you can start looking for answers, at least with Ryoma. Consistently, we've said we need to see him continuing on an upward trajectory, right? We brought him because we thought he could be a top 3 mid laner, right? That's what we talked about. That's what the videos talked about. That's what you need your imports to be, right? If anybody on your squad is going to be top 3, it needs to be your imports. And if they're not, then you need to reconsider, I think, what you're doing. because that's, if you aspire to play at Worlds, you need to have at least some people who are in that top 3. Like that's kind of how this team sport works. He's not there. He's further from there than he was at the end of spring split. That is what tells me that we've given him enough time, right? Because if your answer is not a year, right, where you have very clear trend lines, that like the trend line is, it kind of looks like a mountain, right? And it's not to say that he's back to where he started or it's like all bad, but it is not continuing upward, right? He's not even a bit better than he was at the end of spring.
It's arguably not even a plateau, right?
Right. It's not like he stayed consistent. And I'm not meaning for this to, like, I'm not trying to create a hyperbole here by saying he's completely awful or he's, the worst, but the progress that you would hope to see is just not there. And if I am making decisions about this roster, what else do you have to go on? And so if it's not 1 year, if that's not enough time, it better be 3 splits.
Yeah.
Right. Because you should not go into spring split saying he's our guy, and then 3 weeks in say he's not our guy. We got a different guy. And because the guy you get week 3 of spring 2021 is not going to be as good as the guy you get after spending 5 months finding that guy, right? It's just not going to be. And there's no world where that's the case. This is your window. You have to act now. And I think we have enough information to do that, right? He's not going to be who we need him to be for this squad. I think it's pretty apparent.
Yeah. And I will say that I think this was enough for me to feel like he's not our LCS player. Maybe that means he goes back down to Academy. There's that OSH import rule where we can kind of have an extra import. Maybe he goes down there and chills for a while. I don't know what that means for Saligo. Then it comes, do we get rid of Saligo or keep Ryoma? That's another discussion. I don't know. It's tough. But I don't know.
I'll say in like my weird fantasy GM world. I mean, the only value I'd see in that, right, sending him to Academy, is if you have some vision of him providing you with a very different looking play style, right? If you want to have a roster where, and I think if you're going to do that, you don't send him down there to just see if you can develop more on control mages. I think you send him down to say, you're going to be our assassin guy, right? And sometimes we're going to play with you. And, if the meta is favorable, maybe we're going to play with you all the time. But I think the only way he finds a consistent place in this, this system is if he can find a niche for himself. And he can play Amin Galio, right? So there's one more, right? We just need more looks from him. And right now, the looks that he's giving us on the meta picks is not enough to warrant starting him again. So the only way I'd want to see him in the Academy is if we go full in on this idea that he can provide us with a different look. And if that's not the case, if the coaches don't think that's the case, I'd say I think we're almost better off putting some of our amateur talent, right? Like get that talent pipeline going again. And because he's still an import if he comes back up to LCS. So he's still a valuable resource to be betting on.
Yeah,
even
to be spending, right?
Academy.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And interestingly, because this was asked in the chat, I'm going to put this out there as well. They're asked about contract length. Both Prismal, Saligo, and Fake God are all up this year. This is their contract year. So that's another layer of this to think about and to complicate those decisions and make them even harder than they already were. Yep. So, yeah, man, what a tough thing to do. But I think it is fair that we haven't had a mid laner to really thrive with. Pretty much. So like Ryu, when we had Ryu, it was like he was a very middle mid laner. And for us, at times that was very good. But at the same time, like you said, you want a top 3 if you want to really get there.
Yeah.
And that he wasn't enough to carry us there in most cases. So yeah, dude, if
you're not aspiring for your import to be a top 3, and I know, look, you don't always get what you want, and it's not realistic to think if everybody had a top 3 mid laner, wouldn't
right?
There are going to be teams that miss the ball on that. You need to not be one of those teams.
Yeah,
that's the trick.
Yep. So, yeah, this thing is going to be an absolute mess. And there's always the trap, by the way, which I mentioned last week, where it's like there's so much time between now and the signing period, which starts in November. There's like 3 months until stuff's really going to start happening. And then 5 months, right? Like you pointed out, until the start of the season, the more time goes on, the more we're going to be like, well, maybe, he's been grinding solo queue really hard. He's been expanding champ pool and all this stuff. And you can talk yourself into
right
reasons why it might not be the worst idea for somebody to stay, and we're talking about Ryoma mostly here, but really for anybody. So that is another like possible trap. And it's not to say that he's in a place where he will never get better, never be a better player or anything like that. So there is truth to the fact that, if he's practicing really hard in this offseason, he probably is getting better. Then again, what we've been told pretty consistently is that the difference between players in amateur and academy and LCS is less about the hands and more about how to play as a team, how to do the macro, how to make decisions, how to have information about the game. That stuff is harder to come by out of the context of a 5-man team who's playing together all the time.
Yep.
So progress would be limited. So I think we need to remember stuff like that.
Yeah. Can we just go on record? Okay. Poome, when is enough time? Now is not enough time for Poome. It's not fair. It's not smart. It's you especially now that it's done. One of the things I'll point out about Poome. So here's the reason again. There are things he didn't do well in this series, for sure. He got caught a lot. He died a lot.
Yeah.
Right. You got to look at what was happening. His positioning needs work. He got found out looking for vision, sniffing around the jungle too often. He needs to get better at that for sure. I see him make more of those kinds of mistakes the deeper into this season we go. Right. And to me, one of the things that tells me is I believe there's a possibility that Poome was nervous. Right. He had some nerves to be playing in the playoffs in a series that had grand implications to this program. And I think it showed. Like, he looked like a different player when he played against C9, a much better team, in a game that didn't matter, right? Like, he looked like he was playing for fun. And, he was a free spirit roaming around the map, disrupting backs, compared to what we saw against EG. So, and that's kind of what you expect. If it's somebody who's been playing in the LCS for a very small amount of time and professionally for no time at all, right? Like, just doesn't have the playoff experience, doesn't have the series experience. So if you put any other rookie into that situation and said they didn't have a great series, I don't think people would say, well, what went wrong? Like, why? They'd say, oh, he was a rookie and it was his first series. Okay. What does he stand to gain and how can he be better? Right. Yeah. So I don't think we should shortcut to the point where like Poome is our guy. Why didn't he fix all our problems? It's like Poome is still he hasn't even played a full split, right? Let's not forget that.
Yeah. And a support doesn't fix problems on other sides of the map also. So
yeah,
there's that piece of it. I want to ask a couple, well, actually it's probably just one question and then we'll go to listener takes and finish out the pod. And this question is this. So I don't know, just reading Twitter, reading what the players have been saying. Some of the coaches, like you guys probably saw what Jungle Juice tweeted. Seeing some of the call outs that are being made. I don't know. Things felt exceptionally dark to me after this series. And I mean that coming from like staff and player perspective. It seemed like hope was very little among them, like the way they were talking. And that's a little scary to me. But the other side of the coin is, imagine a world where we beat EG 3-2 in this series and we advance. How different are things feeling? Like, say we flame out and we get crushed by whoever 0-3 in the next series. But if we beat EG 3-2, how different do things feel right now? My guess is, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think people feel radically different.
Right.
It's like I feel like people would not be so defeatist about, especially about Poome and contracts. That was really like weird to me. I don't think they'd be as defeated about that. I understand the Ryoma stuff. I get it. Like, I agree. I get it. But yeah, with Poome and contracts, especially like people calling for them like, oh, they shouldn't be like playing right now. Also, if we just win that series, even if we just barely did, I would bet that things wouldn't feel so dark and dramatic around here. And that is a weird thing to me.
Yeah.
that all it would take is a series win against EG to make that go away. Like, because we won one best of 5 series. Like,
Right.
but at the same time, it feels true to me. In chat, you guys tell me if I'm wrong. Like, if you're like, be honest with yourselves. If we had won this series and get 3-0'd in the next one, I mean, like I said, I'm willing to bet everybody would be a little more positive. Well, a lot more positive about the situation we're in. And I don't know what to make of that.
Let me give you my opinion on that. So look at last split playoffs, right? Sometimes there's just this weird trick that happens in playoffs where you can lose a series in the same standing in the same way and have 2 very different reactions from fans, right? If you lose a big, series badly against TSM, you always just kind of go automatically to they were better than their seeding would imply. And I think we kind of got to do that, right? Where it was like, I mean, we lost to TSM, but you blur your eyes and maybe they're a top 3 team and we played them pretty close. Now, if you lose to EG in the fashion we lost to EG, we are definitively the 7th best team in the LCS. And you could argue that maybe we're not as good as Dig, right? So in people's minds, right, there's who
beat us, right? Before that
exactly.
season.
So it's probably, if you're being honest with yourself, you're probably saying maybe we're the 8th best team. That feels bad. That feels really bad. And that is far from what any of us kind of expected or thought or hoped for going into this split. So I think there is a dash of that in this, right? Where you look at it and you say, I'm trying to be charitable here, but it just feels to me like we are decidedly a barely in playoffs in an expanded format team.
Yeah.
And that feels pretty grim, like you said. We can't fudge the math on it, right? There's no way to do it. And it wasn't close. And so for me, I think that's where a lot of that comes from, is people are just saying, like, what do we have to point to and say, well, at least there was that.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is.
Well,
so yes, to answer your question, I think the fan vibes are very different if we beat EG, because it allows you to start imagining in your head that we are actually a better team. I think that opportunity is gone. And, just eking out a win over EG was like the furthest thing from where we actually landed, which is getting crushed mercilessly.
Yeah.
So,
well, interesting thought experiment. Let's run through some listener takes really quick, and then we'll talk about what's going to happen on the show in a little, like, coming up, and call it and get ready for Fast Speak last week. Let's see where to start. Joe Lewis 20 on Twitter said, unpopular opinion, the roster shuffle can't be seen as a success. It just increased the team's ceiling while increasing the volatility dramatically. The team went from a 3rd place finish with a close best of 5 with TSM to an 8th place 3-0. Jordan, your reaction?
I when you put it like that, it's pretty hard. Last split was very weird, right? There's just a lot of weird stuff going on across. And I think the difference between summer and spring is not just in us. I think a lot of teams figured a lot of stuff out. A lot of changes happened. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point, right? Can you consider this a success? If you are, it's on the margins, right? And certainly it's not a success in the way you'd say, at least now we know what we have to build toward in 2021. We're kind of back at the same spot, which is asking, what do you keep? What do you change? What can you salvage, if anything? Right. And that leaves you with a lot to think about.
Yeah. Going down to a take from Twitter user Jennifer SP. This one is kind of spicy. She says, Ziggs, Jungle Juice, Chimera should be taken a look at this offseason. Kelsey has done great things in academy and should be considered as assistant coach because of her success working with rookies. She can massively help with rebuilding this offseason and build up promising talent. So I'll field this one.
Yep.
I think it is virtually impossible for us to feel like we know enough about Jungle Juice and Chimera.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is an overreach. I'm good, and that's me being nice about that. I think that's a significant overreach. Chimera, certainly. Like, what do we know about Kai and what he does for the team? We don't know enough to be calling for that. So by virtue of the fact that he's an analyst, that's what you're basing that on. We got bad results, so bad analyst. And I get that, but I think that line of reasoning is weak.
It's not a conclusion you should jump to.
Yes.
Right? He might be the best analyst in the league. We don't know.
Right. So I'm not with that portion of the take. And I feel the same way about Jungle Juice. We know very little about him. Zix, we have more. I don't think we have sufficient knowledge, but we have certainly demonstrably more knowledge about what Zix does, because we see the drafts every week, which most people don't like. And we see footage of him, at least with the team interacting, in which I actually like him in those contexts. But the draft thing, I think, is a reasonable problem. So as far as that portion of it, it's like, I'm not going to comment on Jungle Juice and Chimera. I don't think that's wise for people in our positions, for anybody outside the work, to be making that. With Zix, I still never think it's wise to really go after this, but I feel like, if all you're saying is we need to take a look at it, okay, I'm with it there. I'm not sure it's the right call, but I'm at least with it. And then Kelsey has done great things in Academy. Not just saying that because she's right now hanging out in chat, but I think that's a universally agreed on opinion. She's done a lot of good stuff with some shuffling and chaos on that Academy team, like a lot of moving around, and she still makes players look pretty good. So, so that part of the show take I like.
One quick add to that, and this is a broad theme that we'll come back to at some point in the offseason. Accountability for me is it's a huge question mark. I don't know specifically who's accountable for what, right? And if we could look at this lineup, the three people we're talking about, or even four if you count Kelsey, to say who is responsible or accountable for which things, right? And if Jungle Juice were solely responsible for draft, and Zix was really more there to set the strategy, and Kai was there to help us identify specific champions that we should ban. If we knew that kind of stuff, it would be a lot easier to say, well, sure, here's the person that we should be looking at because we're having specific problems with X. We just don't, right? And I don't know that that's a problem. But it's a reality that we have to face. Like, that information is hard to come by. And so I think in the absence of that information, what a lot of people do is they just point to the coach and say, seems like we're not getting as much out of our players, or we don't have a good strategy. Must be the coach's problem, right?
Yeah. With that, I think let's go ahead and call it there. And here's why. So guys, I believe it's going to be 2 weeks from now. We're going to do a Keep It 100 with you guys. So we'll do the opportunity for you guys to call into the show and give us your takes, and we'll grade your takes and react to them. So our version of Hotline League for 100th Thieves fans. Like I said, I think that will be not the upcoming week, but the week after. So we'll go light on the listener takes for them. I think like much of our discussion is going to be trying to figure out concrete, like what can we do in the off season, and real suggestions for what the change should be. I think fans. So Jordan, you and I, we kind of see ourselves as being like a voice of the fans, or like just coming from the fan perspective of things. And I think what the onus on us is to be both reasonable with what we say and what we put out there into the Twitter universe and on Reddit and everything. And then also, if we're going to criticize, we come up with real suggestions and directions and strategies and stuff if we're going to have those conversations in a productive way. So I think that's what we'll focus on in the short term of the content plan for us while we're in this extended off season. So more to come from us on that. And like I said, we'll give you guys a chance to put your voices out there as well. But we got some things coming up. So it should be, even though it'll be a long season, it's an opportunity for, a long off season. It'll be an opportunity for you to spend some time with your dads. And for us to get closer as a family.
We all win, Cole.
That's right.
In other words. And we'll have Worlds. There'll be fun League of Legends to watch, and we'll find ways to celebrate the sport. We're not going anywhere.
Yep. All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap there. Guys, we are going to be doing our Valorant show Fast Speak Last Week here in about 15, 20, 30 minutes, somewhere in there. So hang around. We'll have that show coming up for you in a bit. And we got a lot of talked about there with the huge roster change. You guys want to talk about roster changes? We can talk about them in Valorant. A lot going on there. So hang out with us. Wait patiently while we set change for that.
Ooh.
And until then, we love you and we miss you already.
Take care.